In our old African culture, number one, it was a distinctive teaching to know how to deal with in-laws, which unfortunately in the newer generation, it is not a conversation that we have had. But I remember when we were home, and I remember one time my dad 2, 3, 4 times would sit me aside and tell me, the day you get married, this is how you deal with your in-laws. It was a lesson. For example, that when you are dealing with in-laws, these are people who don't know you like they know their daughter. And likewise, my family knows me more than it knows my wife. You have begun a journey of relationship with these in-laws, okay? One, it is important the little things you do to win them over. Some parents are still bleeding. They bleed when their children leave. Some of them had an opinion on who their wife, your daughter would marry, their son would marry. They have preconceived. Maybe they have a best friend they grew up with. They think, when we grow, your son and my daughter, you know, they agree their thing. And somehow these couples meet one day, and probably you don't even fit the picture of what they saw. Some people marry with baggage. Either you had children before, they have a story on you, and so there's preconceived biases. You're coming into this marriage not as one who even has a problem, but there's already preconceived biases. One, I have learned, and I think that's a conversation one day we should have, especially with the younger generation, that there are nuggets of wisdom in how to deal with in-laws. One, show yourself likable. Yeah? You find a man who is married, but they've never even bought their mother-in-law a small little gift, something small. It won't take much. You see what I'm saying? You go to visit your in-laws and you don't even take a little, especially in Africa here. I don't know how it works in Europe, but even just carrying a little loaf of bread is a statement that you're a responsible husband. You see what I'm saying? When we marry, for example, as men, how many of us know that we actually become guardians to our wives? That if anything happens to that woman, the first person they look for is you. Now, there are responsibilities as guardian that I must do for my spouse to make sure that the family can see that I'm trying to relate with them. Imagine if you're beating your wife every day and the in-laws are hearing that you're beating their daughter every day. You see what I'm saying? It's a hard thing. But there are things that in me are planted as guardian to know that as a guardian of this woman, there are things I'm not supposed to do because they should not be hard. In some instances, it's not even our wives or husbands that take them. Some of the things that we do are so obvious that they are amplified even beyond or before they even say anything. You see what I'm saying? If they find somebody's wife or husband in a bar with another person and they know who your wife is, it doesn't matter how much your spouse is protecting. You have already broken the code as a man of a guardian, because why am I there in this time? You see what I'm saying? So for me, my heart goes to, we were taught how to win them. You must learn to win. Some people actually, the challenges they have with their in-laws is they've actually never tried to be good, to win them over, to bless them with the little small things. Number two, beyond just that, we are also taught how to behave before in-laws, which is a very important thing. Because I'll tell you an example. When I go back home where I'm born, and then we sit down as siblings, something in us takes us back to become kids. Then you hear our conversations, you see us flipping, rolling, you see, and then Apostle Grace at that point is not even an apostle. Why? Because I'm in my zone. Yeah, I don't know what happens when we're 6 children, but when we get together, something happens and we go back, we are like 15. You're running, some are dancing, people are it's just crazy when you come in my father's home, you see? So imagine I carry that atmosphere and I go in my wife's in-laws and then they put on music and I start. Yes, you see, even when your in-law tells you feel free, understand the wisdom of how free it should be. Some people honestly go beyond free. Yeah, some people honestly go beyond free. Know how to carry yourself around your in-laws. There are things I cannot do before my in-laws. There are things I cannot say before my in-laws because, like you said, they will not understand what I truly mean because they were not raised with me. That's one thing. But also number two, now to us as spouses, there are also things we have to do to honor and introduce our own spouses to our households. Our households. I've seen experiences, for example, that where there are people who don't care how their spouse appears before the in-laws. They don't really care how they appears. Or to them, it's not even a point of how your husband or your wife appears before the in-laws. I think it's a very important thing for you to be deliberate on the picture that you paint about your husband or your wife. There are conversations I can never have about my wife to my in-laws, to my brothers and sisters. You see, there are things my brother should not know about my wife because that's our business. I think the challenges that exist between in-laws is when in the bond of brotherhood and friendship, my mother is my friend, my sister is my friend, we do not know the boundary of how far to go when we are sharing, especially the weaknesses of our spouses. Why? Because like I said earlier, when we later reconcile or resolve, these people never resolved. They stay with the mind that this woman is abusive. This woman is selfish. You see, so later on people, yes, you later become good, but that is why you have noticed that when, for example, a man realizes that he was once reported to the in-laws, he's not the kind who will want to visit in-laws. You find those challenges that people don't want to go to the in-laws. Why? Because there's a way someone can come and visit, and the brother-in-law gives him this eye of, I know what you do to my sister. But he's smelling, hello, brother-in-law, how are you? But the eyes are telling him, I know what you do to my sister, and I wish I could punch you. It's just because I have to behave. You're the husband of my sister, but I want to punch you any day. So that kind of man will not feel comfortable in that kind of invitation. Likewise, it happens with our wives, that if we don't know how to cover the glory of your wife, some of them go there and there's the way your sister looks at her, your mother looks at her, and there's something special women have. Women can have a conversation of 1 hour with eyes. I don't know how you do that. So I think for me, it goes back in the things that sometimes we can do. Sometimes you're going to go shopping and buy things and take them to your in-laws, to your parents as a girl, and say, my husband sent this. Not necessarily because he bought, but because you want to introduce him. You want to introduce him. Oh, my wife brought this. Even not necessarily the fact that she brought it, but I want my brother or sister to know that my wife thinks about them this way. And those things really do stay. They really do start making a certain confirmation between the building of this relationship for people to start reconciling certain things. Allow me to say the last thing. Couples should avoid bleeding within their families. If you are watching and listening to me, stop talking about your spouse to your family. Stop it. Because biblically speaking, when you look at the circle, our circles of relationship, it begins with you, your spouse, and God. That's where it begins from. I hope we all agree. And the Bible is clear. If a brother has offended you, I love that the scriptures say, go to him only. It first says, go to him and tell him your fault. Between him and you alone. Why is it important? That if my spouse has wronged me, or if I have wronged my spouse, there has to be a place where we must have a conversation. You have hurt me. If we have failed in marriage, the other person is God. In marriage, the other person is what? Is God. That if I fail to reconcile with my wife some of these things, I must know how to talk to God about my spouse. Unless you don't trust that God can minister and comfort you and relieve you. But if you trust God, allow to leave certain things with God. And if it gets so overwhelming, look for the church where you go to and take it to a pastor and say, Pastor, I think we failed to reconcile. Help us and counsel us. Because the responsibility of a pastor is a steward of oracles, not only of God, but we also keep the secrets of men. There are things that sometimes I sit down in counseling, and by their nature, I'm not even allowed to share with anybody. And they're supposed to stay between me and this spouse, this couple. We try to help them heal out, and then they go back and live their life. Why is that important? Because there is nothing as beautiful as being perfect before your families. It's a very critical thing, especially if you are ministers. Because if you make an error, for example, and your husband reports you to his mother or brother, if you are a minister, you might never be a minister to this mother or brother. That means, in the first place, the virtuous woman is questioned. Because when the Bible says you shall do him good, it didn't mean that he was going to be perfect. I always tell people that if the weakness of your spouse is not safe with you, do not be confused or convinced. Otherwise, their strength will never be safe with you. It will never. Because you have seen them at their weak point, and you cannot minister to that weakness. You can assume that you can deal with their greatness. But if you cannot deal with a person's weakness, you can never deal with their greatness. It's not possible. If I cannot handle the weaknesses of my spouse, it's only a sign that when they get to a certain place of greatness, I will not have the wisdom to deal with that greatness. And it happens. They deal with these little small things, and then one day she's promoted to a great job, or he's promoted in a certain place in the spirit, and then they still become the same problem. Why? Because when your spouse was weak, you did not have the wisdom for their weakness. And if you did not have it, do not be convinced that you can manage their strength. Marriage is a journey. You don't yet know what your wife is going to become. You don't yet know what your husband is going to become. And some, especially for our younger couples, that you're looking, but you don't yet have a clue what he will become. Yes, maybe he doesn't make enough money and is not as... Yes, cover him, because you don't know what might happen in 2 years. This man one day can, break through something and become something. But when he becomes that, there is going to be that question of, if you were not able to handle me when I was weak, how will you handle me when I'm strong?